Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for spending half an hour of your lunch hour with me, talking about supporting and encouraging CPD in the workplace. So there's a pretty picture of me there, so you can see who you're talking to. Hopefully you've been able to dial in okay. Just get on the chat and let me know if there's any problems. And there is just a little diagram of how to get to the chat. So I'm not going to take any Q&A throughout the webinar today, but please, if you've got any questions, add them to the chat, and I'll cover them at the end. Or if we run out of time, I'll make sure that I email you with the answers. So we're talking about supporting CPD in the workplace and the changing face of learning and development and the competitiveness of the job market and the need for organisations to attract and retain talent mean that supporting employee CPD, continuing professional development, is being seen by savvy employers as an integral part of their professional development strategy. That is certainly what we are seeing, an incorporation or an encouragement of CPD. Before I started, I just wanted to put a quote up from Sheryl Sandberg, COO of Facebook. If you haven't read Sheryl's book, Lean In, I would encourage anybody to do so. I think it is an inspiring book for women, but for anybody as well. Build your skills, not your resume. A bit American, but build your skills, not your CV. And I think that, for me, is the fundamental of what CPD should be about. An enhancement of skills, not just for those that are on your CV. So the agenda today is we're going to look at what is CPD. There's a number of people on the call, a really good mix of individuals actually, and I know that we've got some people here representing employer and some people looking at CPD from their own perspective, and that is fine. We're covering both areas. There's some good kind of hints and tips about what your CPD portfolio should look like, and by that I mean what should be in it, what should you be collating and absorbing. So building a good CPD portfolio we'll cover. Why should your employer support you? A good question, and I think it will become apparent as we move through. And following on from that, the really important role of HR. If you are looking at and you're swayed into the idea of, or encouraged by the idea of having CPD as part of your corporate identity, then HR needs to perform a role there. And then we'll look at portfolios and e-portfolios. Wow, in fact, portfolios, here we go. Anybody who has been undertaking CPD as part of their profession or otherwise for a while will probably have a portfolio that looks a bit like this. It may be a bit more of an e-portfolio nowadays, but even often they are just what used to be a folder, kind of haphazardly converted into a piece of software. So not great for going back and reviewing, and quite often from a membership perspective, it's something that you might dig out every 2 years or whenever your membership needs to be reviewed and revalidated, and that can be a bit of a chore. So bear that in mind at the end of the webinar when we look at some e-portfolios. But firstly, what is CPD? So for me, it refers to the process of tracking and documenting skills and knowledge and experience gained both formally and informally, in and outside of work. And fundamentally, CPD is a proactive rather than passive undertaking. Of course, there is an overlap, and you can absorb knowledge from passive activities, but you need to be proactive in terms of reflection and practice and deployment of skills and knowledge in order to cement it and really build from it. Otherwise, all you're doing is literally collecting something that looks a bit like that paper folder in order to do a tick box exercise later on. It should be certainly more than that, and being proactive is key. Is it the same as a development plan? Though those that are on the webinar from an employee perspective, fundamentally no, it's not the same as a PDP, a personal development plan. That is something put in place specifically between employer and employee, and is probably very job role specific and probably in line with organisational objectives. Of course, that adds to the CPD for the individual. Of course it does. But it's not really about individual path and self-enhancement, and it can be certainly something that's put upon an individual rather than where they're choosing to take their development. And the two things are really, really important for employers. If you're looking at bringing in a CPD policy and culture change, then the fine line between enforcing that and encouraging it can be a bit of a tightrope. We will have a look at that later. Is it only for professional memberships? It shouldn't be. In lots of cases, this is how it has been viewed, but it certainly shouldn't be. Of course, there's lots of professions that require you to carry out specific numbers of hours or gain a certain number of points of CPD within a set time frame in order to maintain that profession, maintain that membership. And that CPD will always be targeted towards that. But taking your CPD a step further and looking at cross-industry or cross-specialism experience can be highly effective in problem-solving, idea generation, innovation, and really, really beneficial to both you, the individual, and the employer. And I would say if you're not sat in a profession that undertakes CPD as part of that process, then consider it anyway. This is certainly something for you and your own development throughout your life, really. It is lifelong learning. So CPD should shape an individual's learning and enhance their competitive advantage. It may support your career path, professional membership, but not solely for that reason should you be undertaking it. In fact, what is the purpose of CPD? So we did survey some group of individuals, as many as we could before the webinar, and please feel free to use the chat and add to this, but we found that skills acquisition, skills enhancement was certainly up there as the reasons for undertaking CPD. And of course, maintaining membership not far behind that. In fact, lots of people felt it was the only reason to do it, and maintaining a membership, and it certainly shouldn't be, as we've already discussed. It might be around securing a career path. It might be to enhance your employability, and it might simply be for self-fulfillment. And it's probably a mixture of all those things. When you're documenting and building your portfolio, it's wise to reflect, of course, on how an activity may support your career or profession, but also on how it may just, enhance you as an individual. Looking at skills acquisition, we'll look a little bit more detail in retention later on. There's lots of models, and those of you who are in an HR or training background will probably be familiar with the model in front of you now, which is the unconscious incompetence, unconscious competence model. A bit of a mouthful, but if you follow the circle round, so as a refresher for those who haven't seen this in a while, this is moving from a novice in something to a master or an expert. And there's lots of other models out there. Dreyfus and Dreyfus is another one. You have a 5-step process of skills acquisition from novice to expert. This one in front of you I find a little bit simpler, and it really has some fundamentals that I think we can all all take into our own learning path. If you think of when you maybe learnt to drive, to begin with, you don't know what you don't know, and then you're moving through to something that feels very awkward and difficult, and having to put a lot of thought into it, and then you're getting and gaining actions that become part of your conscious, and you're able to do them without thinking so much. And the goal of any skill may be to become an expert or a master in it, and then to be able to think innovatively about it and see areas and additions to that knowledge or skill that others may not have been able to see because they're concentrating too much on it. So, and that is only done through repetition and review of those skills and being able to undertake it numerous times. There's another kind of model or statistic out there is the 10,000 hours, and there was a book written about this not so long ago. Lots of people have tried to put it into practice, which talked about violin students and the theory that if you spend 10,000 hours practicing something, you'll become an expert in it regardless. Now, there's lots of other factors, natural talent that may come into play, social influences, but fundamentally, to be very good at something, you certainly need to do it more often, and that's the same as retaining knowledge that you've learned. So what does CPD need to do? CPD, fundamentally, it needs to be self-directed, not necessarily driven by the employer, but certainly driven by the individual. That doesn't mean to say that the employer can't benefit from it and encourage it. It needs to focus on learning from experience, reflective learning and review, and they are really key. It is not essentially CPD unless you're doing some sort of reflection or review on it. It's got to help the individual set development goals and objectives. That's really important. And it's got to include both formal and informal, or should include formal and both informal learning. So when you're looking at your own CPD portfolio, think about what you're going to add to that. And it needs to be documented. It needs to be a formal process. So if we're looking at building a thorough CPD portfolio, what should you have in it? So if you're looking at a kind of holistic learning approach and a very rounded approach to learning, there should be lots of areas within CPD that you're considering. One of them is peer-to-peer feedback, learning, shadowing, assisting experienced colleagues. We, as an organisation, went through a process about 12 months ago of trying to embed peer-to-peer feedback and learning and reviews within our organisation. And it started with our development team, agile software development team, but it's moved throughout the organisation now. And I have to say, I'm being very honest with you, it was a challenge to begin with. It wasn't something people were familiar with or used to, and it needed to be embedded quite carefully. And any of you thinking of embedding any of these changes into your organisation, manage it as you would any change process. It needs to be thought through and undertaken carefully in order to be successful. Strongly consider networking. Networking is a great way of building your knowledge, and it might not be for everyone. Not everybody finds networking comfortable, but step outside of your comfort zone and do give it a try. You'll gain so much from it. And be conscious about your networking. So make sure you've got a way of noting who you've met, noting down who they are. LinkedIn is great for this, but LinkedIn doesn't necessarily help with trying to find who you've actually met and those that have just connected with you. But within a networking environment, make sure you can remember who you've properly met, who you've properly spoken to you, and how they may be able to benefit you and you be able to benefit them in the future. And be proactive about that. Of course, read about new technologies, new methods of working, legislative changes, anything that may help you absorb that information, but make sure you review and reflect on it. Insights and learning points from coaching and mentoring. A interesting statistic is that around 71% of Fortune 500 companies have a formal mentoring program, and they view that as one of the reasons of their success. And 75% of executives can view that their mentor has strongly influenced how they have got to the position that they are today. So mentoring can be a huge advantage. If you're not in an organisation that has a mentoring scheme, then don't be put off. maybe that your HR department is looking to embed one, but there are schemes out there. Use your network, but also look at external charities and schemes that look at mentoring as well, specifically for smaller organisations. If you are looking at using an individual within your network for mentoring, then first off, don't be disheartened if they say no. It's a two-way process, a mentoring, and both get a lot out of it, the mentor and the mentee, but it is a time commitment and it's not for everybody. But don't despair. Keep looking if you haven't found an individual that will help you, and it is personal. You've got to be able to work with each other. I mentioned it before, but it's worth stating again, reflections are absolutely key. If you're in the healthcare industry or a teacher, then reflecting on your CPD will be absolutely embedded with you. You'll have done it from your training days throughout your career. For those of us not in those sorts of professions, reflection might not come naturally. We might not have even really thought about it. We may do it a bit haphazardly or unconsciously, but be conscious about it. When you reflect on learning points or critical incidents or whatever it may be, then look at what you were saying, what you were doing, what you were thinking, what you were feeling, and how you can embed or change or do something for the better next time around, and really consider those. Look at lessons learned from mistakes, critical incidents, whatever it might be, and again, review those. And look at secondments and deputising or job swaps. Not every organisation is going to offer these. The public sector is a little bit better at it than the private sector, and it's not for everybody, but consider it as part of your portfolio if it's of interest to you. So why should employers support CPD? I think we've touched on this, but if you're looking at individuals and you're valuing who they are, who they want to be, then they're going to be engaged and they're going to be empowered as part of your organisation. It's proven that staff who feel valued are more likely to stay as an organisation, and there's a positive correlation between well-structured CPD and motivation and innovation, and all that has got to benefit the employer. So when employers invest in their employees by providing them with opportunities to learn new skills or knowledge, it signals an investment in that individual and in their present and their future career growth, and that is extremely valuable. Numerous reports have been undertaken correlating employee satisfaction with training and career progression. One of them recently in 2016 was a report from the Society of Human Resource Management, and they'd found that 40% of employees had said that their job satisfaction was directly related to employers giving them opportunities for career development and training. I've put value to the business on this slide as well, but I've specifically not said that it should be a way of cutting L&D budget, because I absolutely don't think that's the case. L&D budget should be there to support the organisational directives, but that doesn't mean to say that the organisation shouldn't support the personal directives of the individual, and that, as we've just discussed, through increased engagement, motivation, loyalty, is of course a value to the business. And if you're nurturing talent, then you are saving on losing individuals and therefore having to retrain. And the cost, as we all know, of retraining or getting new employees on board is phenomenal in respect to keeping and nurturing the talent that we've got. And of course, if you're providing these sorts of strategies, then you're aiding recruitment because you're being seen as an employer of choice. So, if I've convinced you that it's a good thing to do for an organisation, then the role of HR is integral. You've got to view this as a strategy and not be haphazard about it if you're serious with it. Build a policy around it. I would strongly request that you do that. Build a mission statement around what it is you're trying to achieve in order to really push this culture change. And it will be a cultural change for a lot of organisations. If you're seen as putting the effort in to your employees, then you're going to get an awful lot back from that. But there is a fine line between encouragement rather than enforcement, and it is the role of HR to ensure that that line is viewed. Otherwise, people will see it as something they're being forced to do, and therefore it's not really CPD. So it is a fine line, but if you encourage it and you breed the right culture that supports it, then you'll be well on the way to seeing the results. And those results are probably medium long term. I'm not going to tell you the quick wins here. There may be some, but this is a medium to long term cultural change which will provide you with organisational benefits. Lead by example. Be seen as a leadership team and management teams that you are undertaking this strategy as well, and be open about it. Absolutely always fundamental within any cultural change management process. Make it accessible. So provide employees with the time to undertake their CPD. Build it into a weekly or a monthly schedule, and so it's integrated into working life. And consider some software maybe that helps support them. That might be through your LMS or an e-portfolio system. And look at what's on the market. There's a range of portfolios out there that may help. As I said, avoid the ones that have essentially just been what was a paper form and is now being put into software, and look at something that's engaging and encouraging and responsive. Make it personal. So encourage a wide range of learning activities, as we've already said, and remind people of what they can be undertaking as part of CPD. Look at the peers and shadowing and mentoring that we've just discussed, and support managers. It's critical that they are on board. Encourage staff to take control of their own development, but this requires strong leadership and management. Build it into your performance and appraisal process. Make sure that your managers have got the tools at hand so that they can easily support their team. So on that, let's look at portfolios and this awful kind of paper stack that many of us will be familiar with. So can you imagine the retention of trying to remember what was in the learning that you've undertaken over all these years? And a really, I think, disappointing statistic is that research suggests that within 1 hour, people have forgotten 50% of the information they've learned or been presented. That's absolutely crazy. That gets worse. Within 24 hours, they've forgotten 70%, and within a week, they've forgotten 90%. So with no retention aids, 90% of your L&D budget is wasted because people have forgot it. I think as an organisation, that's absolutely terrible. I'm in a learning environment, and I don't think anybody should be wasting that much. And I don't think software has been out there to help support that. With aids, that can improve greatly. So with review and reflection and reminders and all the things that happen with good CPD and should be embedded into any kind of training process, that can pull up that learning and take it from your short-term memory, embedded into your long-term memory, and that's the absolute goal. This is one of the most well-known cognitive research findings, and yet it is one of the least applied. So let's change that. The portfolio, such as the Enterprise Study Vital portfolio, does help with this engagement piece. So they've got a screenshot here, and I'll dive into the system in a moment. Screenshot here of how it's been set up for one of our customers, but this can be adapted for any CPD process. This one is particularly a 1-year time frame, and there's different cards here to engage people to undertake CPD in different areas. There's various ways that you can look at this, and if I just log into this one, which has been set up for some of our nurse and midwifery customers. So we've got about 10,000 individuals using the portfolio. This one, as I say, has been set up for nurses specifically, and midwives for their NMC revalidation process. And that process requires them to capture hours of practice, participatory and non-participatory CPD, as well as feedback and reflections. So what you're seeing here is a 3-year process and a timeline at the top for 3 years, and where it is saying that this individual should be within that 3-year process between now and then. So they should be about 41% of the way through, or they are at 41% of the way through, but it's highlighted in red here that, they've not got any feedback, they've not got any reflections. And so the system will be encouraging them, as they undertake pieces of CPD and they add it into the system, to be reflecting and gaining feedback as well. These cards could be your mentoring scheme, your peer-to-peer feedback scheme, or just CPD that people have undertaken formally or informally. And it may be that you're plugging this in from an LMS, so you could pull through the training that's chosen to be in the CPD portfolio from an LMS. Ours certainly does that if you're using the Enterprise Study one, but we can do that with your incumbent LMSs as well. The individual would add their details onto this, or it would automatically pull through. They then got the opportunity to reflect, and as I say, with reminders and notifications, they're reminded to do so. And we can tailor this to the CPD that's required within your organisation. So as I said earlier on, there's a more detailed webinar in February about the portfolio. That's just a little taster of it. Please do give us a call or email. The details are on screen if you want to see any of those in more detail. There's the white paper on the webinar on the website, and I'll be sending out the slide deck as well. The webinar has been recorded, so we'll also put the record up for those that haven't been able to attend today. It's been a pleasure to have you, and I hope you found it useful. Many thanks for your time.